Chapter 11. "What's happening?" a girl shrieked. "Is it a holdup or something?" "No," someone else shouted. "It's a fire!" "Fire!" a man yelled fearfully. Mass confusion broke loose. Separated from Ned, Nancy was jostled from two sides as she inched in what she hoped was the direction of the closest wall. She waved her arms in front of her until her hands found the smooth, solid plaster. Turning, she pressed her back to it, squeezing out of the way of the hordes of people making blind, panicked dashes in every direction. "Simon! Simon, where are you?" A woman near Nancy was screaming, her voice filled with terror. "Simon, are you all right?" "Stay calm," Nancy called out to her. "The lights will be back on in a few minutes." "Simon!" the woman kept shrieking. "Ladies and gentlemen, please do not panic." A new voice filled the air, loud and hollow. Someone was speaking through a megaphone. "The electrical short on stage caused a temporary power outage, but the electricity should be restored in a matter of minutes. Please stay where you are. I repeat, stay where you are." Nancy eased herself into a sitting position on the floor to wait. She could hear others do the same. But as the panic subsided, her own fears began to blossom in the overwhelming blackness. Had the power outage been an accident? Or was it perhaps a little too convenient, coming as it did on the heels of Vivian's threat to Alan? The minutes ticked away. Nancy prayed to herself that this would be no rerun of the night Barton disappeared. Then, suddenly, the power came flooding back on. Nancy blinked, needing to adjust her eyes even to the subdued lighting of the club. The band stood on stage, checking their instruments and amplifiers now that the electricity was working again. But one person was missing. Where was Alan? Nancy felt panic rising in her throat. Then she noticed that the curtain shielding the backstage area from the audience had been pulled down, a casualty of the frenzied rush of people immediately following the blackout. She let out a noisy sigh of relief as she saw Alan standing off to one side, staring at a sheet of paper. Ned was still more or less where he had been before the power had blown. As he looked around, Nancy waved to him. He caught sight of her, his face softening with relief, and made his way across the room. Nancy kissed him quickly. "Listen, Ned," she said. "I'm going to talk to Alan and see what he wanted to tell me. Maybe you should go look for George and make sure she's okay." "What about Bess?" Ned wanted to know. "I don't see her back there." He looked behind the stage. "I'll ask Alan about her." "Meet you back here?" Ned asked. "In 10 minutes. Nancy hoisted herself onto the stage and headed straight for Alan. She wasn't bothered by any guards. They were trying to restore order in the club. The concert evening was over. Alan stood rooted to the stage floor. He was staring blankly ahead of him, his cheeks pale, his eyes glazed. His right hand shook violently as he clutched his guitar. "Hey," Nancy called out gently. "Alan." He whipped his head around in her direction. "What?" he said, his voice as tight as a rubber band at the point of snapping. "What's wrong?" Nancy moved to his side and touched his arm. The hollow look in his eyes made her almost afraid to hear his answer. "Wrong? Why should anything be wrong?" "I heard you arguing with Vivian." Alan inhaled sharply, but said nothing. "I know you didn't really see Barton," Nancy prodded. "So why don't you tell me the rest?" Alan shook his head back and forth, never lifting his eyes to meet Nancy's. "No. No, I can't. You wouldn't understand." Nancy sensed the terror behind the stubborn words. "How am I supposed to understand if you don't tell me?" she asked. Only a short time before, he had seemed so determined to let her in on whatever he knew. What horrible thing had happened while the lights were out to make him change his mind so completely? "Alan," Nancy persisted, "that blackout happened for a reason, didn't it?" "Please," Alan begged. "I said I'm not talking." "Okay, I can't force you, but at least tell me where Bess is. I thought she was back here." Alan bit down hard on his lower lip, and Nancy could see it tremble. "Oh, Alan," Nancy cried. "It isn't Bess, is it?" She held her breath. Alan didn't utter a sound. "Alan!" "She's fine," he whispered hoarsely. "Bess is fine." "Where is she?" Nancy felt like a 5-gear car being forced to run in first. "She's sick. She went back to the hotel." "Alone?" "She took a taxi." "How'd she get out of here so fast? The lights just came back on. Besides, I saw her when I got here and she looked fine." Nancy reached for Alan's shoulders and started shaking him. "What's wrong with her? Tell me!" "Hey, give me a break," he protested weakly, stepping back. "She left by the back door, had a cold or the flu or something, and she specifically asked that no one disturb her later tonight." Nancy listened to Alan's story gain momentum. "She went back to the hotel to take some cold medicine and go to sleep, okay? Are you finished giving me the 3rd degree?" Nancy let her arms drop. "You mean Bess went home to take her Modasilin?" "Modasilin, that's right." "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure." Nancy shivered, despite the warm air inside the club. "Alan," she said coldly, "if Bess ever took Modasilin, she could die. She's allergic to it. Now tell me the truth." The guitar slid out of Alan's hand. His knees gave out, and he slumped to the floor. I can't. If I tell, they'll..." "Who's they?" Nancy fought to stay calm. "Is there anyone here you're afraid of?" She motioned to the members of Bent Fender, who had gathered around nervously when they'd seen Alan collapse. Alan shook his head. "Then how is anyone going to know you told us?" Nancy asked softly. "Because you'll try to find her." "Bess? Then she's not back at the hotel." Nancy's voice hardened. "Alan, what's going on?" Alan's words came out in a jumbled rush. "You can't go after her. The shipment, they'll hurt her if the shipment doesn't go out tonight. Please, just let them get it out." "What shipment?" "Alan, I swear, I'd never do anything to harm Bess. You've got to believe me." Alan sighed deeply. "They grabbed her," he rasped, "during the blackout, so I wouldn't tell you what I heard. I don't know where they took her." "Who's they? Vivian? Mr. Marshall?" "Marshall?" Puzzled, Alan looked up. "No, not him." "You mean Vivian's in on this, but Harold Marshall isn't?" "That witch," Alan said, through clenched teeth. "Everyone thinks Marshall is the boss, but Vivian's got him running around in circles, and he's too stupid and egotistical to realize it. He's like a marionette, and she's pulling all the strings." "Of course." Nancy nodded grimly. "How could we have been so blind? Roger, remember you said Vivian would do anything for Marshall? She buttered him up until she had complete control over him. Marshall's huge ego made him take credit for all the ideas she fed him, which was exactly what Vivian wanted. That way, if anyone caught on to what she was doing, her boss would shoulder the blame. I almost fell for it too." "It's an easy mistake to make," Roger said. "Marshall's personality doesn't exactly make you want to give him the benefit of the doubt." His mouth settled into a tight line. "Although he did offer you that record contract, didn't he?" Roger turned to Alan. Alan hesitated. "You promise that nothing will happen to Bess if I tell you?" Alan asked again. Alan, we're all Bess's friends, Nancy assured him. I know she and I had that fight, but I love Bess. Anything happens to her... Okay, you were right to think that Marshall offered me the contract just to get me to tell you I'd seen Barton. But I didn't think about that, just like I didn't realize that Marshall's offer was Vivian's idea. I didn't see anything I didn't want to see. I was so wrapped up in the idea of being famous. Alan pounded his fist against the floor. This whole thing is my fault. If I hadn't been so convinced I was star material, Bess would be safe right now. Alan, this is no time to start blaming yourself, Nancy said firmly. You have to tell us what you know so we can figure out what to do about it. I really believed them. I thought they wanted me to record because they thought I was good. And when Marshall told me that Barton's disappearance was a publicity stunt, I believed that too. I mean, I wanted to believe it. As long as he was all right, but out of the picture, he was my ticket to success. So when Harold Marshall asked me to tell you I saw Barton, I agreed. Don't get me wrong, I really believed Barton was fine. But Alan, I thought you said Marshall didn't have anything to do with whatever is going on, said Nancy, confused. That's right, he didn't. Vivian planted the publicity idea in his head and then told him she'd take care of the details. So when you started asking questions, Nancy, he thought you were nosing in where you didn't belong. Vivian convinced him to offer me a contract in exchange for getting you off his back. Of course, neither of them ever expected to let me go through with the recording. Alan toyed with a strand of dark curly hair. Guess I was a fool. Alan, Nancy said impatiently, how do you know all this? I'm getting to that. See, I had convinced myself that my lie about Barton wouldn't hurt anyone, but when you and Bess had that fight, I saw that something was wrong. To make things worse, Bess was defending me when I didn't even deserve it. Why didn't you level with her right then and there? And with me? Nancy bent down to look Alan in the eye. I wanted to, but I was so afraid Bess would hate me for it. I just didn't have the guts to confess. Regret was etched on his face, and Nancy felt her anger toward him soften a bit. So I stuck to my lie, Alan went on, but I just didn't feel right about it after that. You started me worrying about whether Barton really was all right, and I realized that if anything happened to him, it would be partially my fault. I still couldn't bring myself to tell Bess then, but I decided that, at the very least, I ought to go to Mr. Marshall and insist that I see Barton in person, just to know for sure. Alan took a breath. Anyhow, I went over to his office late this afternoon while Bess was out jogging. He wasn't there, but Vivian was. She was sitting in his office using the telephone, and the door was open a crack. I could hear everything she said, and it was what I just told you about the publicity story and my record contract. And something about a shipment of some sort? Nancy asked, recalling his earlier words. Yeah, I don't know what kind of shipment, but she told whoever she was talking to that it was going out tonight. The bootleg albums, Nancy said. Did she say where they were being shipped to? Heading east, that's all. Weird, Roger said. I thought New York was as far east as you could get. Maybe she meant the east side of town. Or maybe she wasn't talking about this country at all, Nancy said. Maybe by east she meant the eastern hemisphere. Like China? Roger asked. Exactly. Nancy sighed. Her hunch about the lack of copyright laws in that country could very well play out. But that didn't make her feel any better. It meant that Anne Nordqvist might not be off the hook after all. However, any further thoughts about China and Anne Nordqvist ceased when Alan began talking again. I don't know if the destination is going to matter much when you hear the rest of Vivian's conversation, he said. Oh no. Nancy steeled herself for what was next. Vivian said that there was a body going out with the shipment. Barton! Roger Gould exclaimed in horror. Tell me Vivian's exact words, Nancy instructed Alan, her heart filling with dread. Alan tensed. Like I said, one body going out with the shipment was the way she put it. Then the person on the other end of the phone must have said something. Vivian answered, No, we're going to do it right before we ship him out. Silence him for good. Alan's voice was shaking again. The last thing I heard was, Yeah, pick up at the Duck House, as usual. 10:30. Right. Then Vivian hung up. Nancy glanced at her watch. 9 o'clock. What happened next? She said, her own voice trembling. If she couldn't find Barton in an hour and a half, she might never find him. Alive. Or find Bess either. I tried to sneak out, Alan said, but I was so freaked out about what I'd overheard that I knocked something over as I was leaving the outer office. A chair, I think. After that, I just ran as fast as I could, down the stairs and out the building. I went to the hotel and got Bess and brought her here to the club. I thought I got away clean. But you didn't tell Bess what you'd heard? Nancy asked. Alan shook his head. I knew I had to tell you everything. Tonight, I thought, here at the club. So I figured I'd level with Bess at the same time. Besides, I guess I wanted to put that part off as long as possible, having Bess find out she'd fallen for a worthless bum. But how did Vivian find out you knew? Nancy asked. Alan reddened. Vivian looked out the window and saw me leaving. She knew she'd find me here at the concert. So she arranged the power outage and had Bess kidnapped to keep you from talking? Nancy asked, beginning to put all the pieces together. Alan stood up, reached into the back pocket of his leather pants, and pulled out a crinkled piece of yellow-lined paper. Silently, he handed it to Nancy. She smoothed it out and read the words printed in bold box letters. Do not say a word to anyone if you want to see your girlfriend again, the note read. End of chapter 11.